Episode 3, The Thanksgiving Revelation. I waited until dessert was being served to make my move. Standing slowly, I tapped my glass with a fork, the sound cutting through the chatter. "Everyone," I began, my voice steady, "I'd like to say a few words." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. Marissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smile faltering. Bruce leaned back in his chair, his expression curious. My mother raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "This Thanksgiving, I've been reflecting on what family means," I said, my gaze sweeping the room, "on trust, love, and the bonds that hold us together. And I've realized something, those bonds can be fragile." The tension in the room was palpable now, the air thick with anticipation. "For years," I continued, "I thought I understood what family meant. I thought it was about trust, loyalty, and unconditional love. But recently, I've come to realize that family can also mean betrayal." Gasps rippled through the room, and the faint hum of whispers began to spread among the guests. Marissa's face turned ghostly pale, and Bruce's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. My mother's jaw tightened, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "I didn't plan to speak tonight," I said, reaching down to the folder resting on the chair beside me, "but I believe it's time we address some truths that have been hidden for far too long." Marissa's voice was the first to break the silence. "Alex, what are you doing?" she asked, her tone strained. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago," I said simply. I placed the folder on the table, flipping it open to reveal the first set of documents. "This," I said, pulling out a photo and holding it up for everyone to see, "is proof of meetings between Marissa and Bruce at a boutique hotel in town. Meetings that were far from innocent." The murmurs grew louder, the shock spreading like wildfire. Guests craned their necks to get a better look, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and pity. Marissa shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she cried, her voice shaking. "You're blowing things out of proportion." "Alex." "Am I?" I asked, my tone icy, "because I also have these." I pulled out a series of bank statements, laying them on the table. "These show money being siphoned from our joint accounts into shell companies tied to Bruce. Tens of thousands of dollars over the course of several years." "Care to explain that, Marissa?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape. Bruce leaned forward, his smirk returning. "All right, Alex," he said, his tone smug. "You've made your point, but dragging this out in front of everyone? Not good at all." I turned to him, my fury barely contained. "Not good? What about you using my money, manipulating my family, sleeping with my wife?" The room erupted in shocked gasps, the air thick with tension. Bruce's composure cracked for the first time. He didn't know how to answer. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to remain calm. I turned my attention to my mother, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Her expression was unreadable, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her discomfort. "And then there's you," I said, my voice laced with bitterness, "the person who was supposed to protect me, my own mother, who orchestrated this entire mess." The room fell silent once more, all eyes shifting to her. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on me with a mixture of anger and defiance. "Alex," she began, her tone cold, "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but you're mistaken. Everything I've ever done was for your benefit." "For my benefit?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Colluding with Bruce? Help Marissa to lie and cheat? That's your idea of benefit?" She straightened in her chair, her composure returning. "You're too naive to understand how the world works," she said. "I was protecting your interests, ensuring your future." "My future?" I shot back. "You changed my future. You've damaged my trust in you, in Marissa, in everything I thought we stood for." The room was suffocating now, the weight of the revelations pressing down on everyone. The other guests sat frozen, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Marissa sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Bruce glared at me, his jaw clenched, while my mother remained stone-faced, her mask of control slipping ever so slightly. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I've requested to freeze the assets you thought you could manipulate, and I've filed the paperwork to ensure none of you can do any more damage." Marissa looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, please," she whispered, "we can fix this. We can move past it. There's no fixing this, I said coldly, not after everything you've done. I turned to the rest of the guests, addressing them directly. I'm sorry you had to witness this, I said, but it needed to be done. For too long, I've allowed these people to manipulate me, to use me. Tonight, that ends. I looked directly at Marissa. I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow, and I'll be fighting for full custody of the kids. They deserve better than this. Turning to my mother, I added, as for you, consider this the end of our relationship. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. Finally, I faced Bruce. I thought we were good friends, but you betrayed me, and the last bit of respect I had for you is gone. Now, our friendship is gone. The room was silent as I gathered the folder and walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of what had once been my family. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. The truth was out, and while the road ahead would be difficult, I was ready to face it. With that, I left the dining room, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me. As I climbed the stairs to my office, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and while the road ahead would be difficult, I was finally free from their lies. As I climbed the stairs to my office, the echoes of the confrontation lingered in my ears. The shocked gasps, the whispered murmurs, Marissa's sobs. It all felt like the climax of a play, but I knew the fallout was only beginning. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The folder I had carried felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just evidence, it was the key to dismantling the lies that had ruled my life for years. But now that the truth was out, the question remained, what would I do next? Downstairs, the atmosphere had shifted. The once festive dining room was now a tense gathering of murmured conversations and lingering stares. Guests shuffled uncomfortably, their half-eaten desserts forgotten. Some whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what they had just witnessed. Marissa sat at the table, her face streaked with tears, her hands clutching a napkin as if it were her last lifeline. Bruce had retreated to the far corner of the room, his phone in hand, likely trying to salvage what little control he had left. My mother, as composed as ever, sipped her wine, her gaze distant, calculating her next move. Is it true? One of the guests finally asked, breaking the silence. All of it? Marissa didn't respond. Bruce glared at the person who spoke, but his usual charm was nowhere to be found. My mother remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. One of Marissa's close friends leaned toward her, her voice low but audible enough for others to hear. Marissa, how could you let this happen, after everything Alex has done for you? Marissa shook her head, her voice breaking. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Her words trailed off, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Meanwhile, in my office, I paced back and forth, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through me. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I saw Jared's name flashing on the screen. How did it go? He asked as soon as I picked up. Done, I replied, sinking into my chair. The truth is out, but now I have to deal with the aftermath. Jared's tone was calm and reassuring. You did what needed to be done. Exposing them in front of everyone was risky, but it sends a clear message. They won't be able to manipulate you anymore. I know, I said, exhaling deeply, but it doesn't make this any easier. The kids, I don't even know where to start. We'll take it one step at a time, Jared said. For now, focus on securing the house and ensuring Marissa, Bruce, and your mother don't have access to anything they can exploit. The thought of my kids brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Thomas, Emma, and Lucas had been upstairs during the dinner, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding below. I couldn't shield them from the truth forever, but I needed to figure out how to approach the situation delicately. As if on cue, there was a soft knock on my office door. Dad, it was Thomas's voice, hesitant and uncertain. I opened the door to find all three of them standing there, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Thomas, always the most perceptive, was the first to speak. What happened? Everyone downstairs looks upset. I knelt down, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's complicated, I said softly. There are things I need to explain, but I want you to know that no matter what, I love you. That will never change. Lucas, still young enough to cling to innocence, hugged me tightly. Are you mad at Mom? He asked, his voice muffled against my chest. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I'm upset about some things, buddy. But what's most important is that you and your siblings are safe and loved. Emma, ever the quiet observer, finally spoke. Is this about the arguments you and Mom have been having? Her question hung in the air, and I realized just how much they had noticed despite my efforts to shield them. Yes, I admitted, but we'll get through this together. As the evening wore on, the guests began to leave, their faces a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Some offered kind words as they passed me, while others avoided my gaze entirely. By the time the last car pulled out of the driveway, the house felt emptier than ever. The remnants of the previous night's chaos still lingered, half-empty wine glasses on the table, chairs left askew, and a heavy tension that seemed to cling to every corner. The sun streamed through the windows, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill in the air. Marissa's sobs had faded into silence hours ago, and Bruce had stormed out shortly after our confrontation. My mother had left without a word, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor as she walked out the door. I re-entered the living room just as the first guests began to leave. Marissa was sitting in the living room, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Alex, please," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "Talk about what? The years of lies? The money you give Bruce? The affair with Bruce? Or how you thought you could manipulate me forever?" She flinched at the coldness in my tone, but she pressed on. "I know I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped loving our family." I shook my head, my voice flat. "Love isn't what you did, Marissa. Love doesn't lie and betray. Whatever you felt, it wasn't love." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. She pleaded, "Please, Alex, don't give up on me. I will do anything to get your forgiveness, but I want to fix this. For us, for the kids. There is no us anymore," I said, my voice firm. "The only thing I care about now is protecting the kids. As for you and Bruce, you'll face the consequences of your actions." Her shoulders shook with sobs and said, "What about the kids?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "Don't they deserve a family?" "They deserve a family built on honesty and trust," I said firmly, "not one held together by lies and manipulation." By the time I finally retreated to bed, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I felt a sense of clarity. The confrontation had been painful, but it was necessary. The truth was out, and the facade was shattered. Tomorrow, I will begin the next phase: custody arrangements, financial protections, legal actions. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. Later that day, I met with Jared to finalize the next steps. He had already begun drafting the divorce papers, along with the necessary documents to secure full custody. "This won't be easy," Jared warned, his tone serious. "Marissa's lawyers will fight back, especially if Bruce decides to get involved." "Let them," I said. "I'm not backing down." Jared nodded, sliding a stack of papers across the desk. "These are the initial filings. Once we submit them, the legal process will begin." I picked up the pen, my hand steady as I signed the documents. Each stroke of the pen felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. When I returned home, I found the kids in the backyard, their laughter a brief reprieve from the tension that had consumed the house. Lucas was chasing Emma and Thomas around the garden, their shouts of joy cutting through the otherwise quiet afternoon. Watching them, I felt a renewed sense of determination. No matter what happened, I would do whatever it took to ensure they were safe and happy. When I saw Marissa, I said, "Let's sit down and talk for a bit." She nodded and sat down across from me. I began to speak in a hoarse voice. "Here are the divorce papers. Sign them and we'll be free, and I will win custody of the child." "This isn't about you anymore," I said, my voice firm. "This is about them, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't argue. For once, she seemed to understand that this was a fight she couldn't win. The house felt emptier after that, the weight of the upcoming legal battle looming over everything. But amidst the chaos, I felt a sense of clarity. This was the right decision for me, for the kids, and for our future. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with lawyers, discussions with Jared, and attempts to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the kids. Marissa moved into the guest bedroom, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal I was trying to move past. Bruce, thankfully, stayed away, though his silence felt more like a temporary retreat than a permanent withdrawal. My mother, on the other hand, had not given up so easily. She called repeatedly, leaving voicemail after voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. One of her messages said, "We need to talk about this. You're throwing away everything we've built." I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing left to say. In the evening, as I tucked Lucas into bed, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, are you and Mom going to get a divorce?" The question caught me off guard, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Yes, buddy," I said gently, "but that doesn't mean we love you any less. You and your siblings are the most important thing to us." He frowned, his small hands clutching the blanket. "Will we still be a family?" "Of course," I said, stroking his hair. "We'll always be a family, no matter what." He nodded, seeming to accept my answer, and I kissed his forehead before leaving the room. As I turned off the light and began to close Lucas's door, his voice stopped me. He hesitated, biting his lip. "If we're still a family, does that mean you and Mom will ever be together again? Like before?" His voice cracked on the last word. I knelt beside his bed, meeting his gaze. His big brown eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a mirror of the questions I knew he didn't know how to ask. "I don't think so, Lucas," I said, my voice steady but soft. "Sometimes, people love each other, but things change, and they can't stay together the same way anymore." "But I could help," he said quickly, sitting up. "I could make breakfast for you both, like that time we burned the toast but still laughed. Or I could be extra good, then maybe we'd be happy again?" My throat tightened as I pulled him into my arms, his small frame trembling against mine. "Oh, Lucas, this isn't your fault, and there's nothing you need to fix, okay?" His arms clung to my neck, and for a moment, he was silent. The weight of his emotions pressed into me. Then he whispered, "I don't want us to break." I closed my eyes, holding him tighter, willing myself not to break in front of him. I said, my voice cracking, "We're just changing, but I promise, no matter what, you'll always have me and Mom, always." He nodded slowly, his breathing evening out as exhaustion overtook him. As I finally stepped out and closed his door, I leaned against the wall, staring at the faint light from under Marissa's door across the hall. The weight of Lucas's words lingered, heavy and undeniable. I don't want us to break. I didn't either, but what was broken could sometimes only be rebuilt into something different, not the same, but maybe still strong enough to carry us forward. Episode 4, The Legal Battle. The day I stepped into the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Rows of benches filled with spectators whispered among themselves, their curiosity almost tangible. Marissa was already seated at the plaintiff's table, her posture rigid, her face pale but determined. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering something in her ear. She nodded but didn't look my way. This was it, the culmination of weeks of preparation, of sleepless nights spent poring over evidence, of countless strategy meetings with Jared. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about money or reputation, it was about my children's future. Jared sat beside me, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, Alex," he said quietly, "we're here to protect the kids. Focus on that, and let me handle the rest." I nodded, taking a deep breath as the judge entered the room. Everyone rose, the sound of shuffling feet filling the silence. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, the Honorable Judge Peters presiding. As we took our seats, Judge Peters adjusted his glasses and surveyed the room. "This case concerns custody and financial disputes in the divorce of Alexander Hood and Marissa Hood. Both parties will present their arguments, and I will issue a ruling based on the evidence provided." The first blow came swiftly. Marissa's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Donovan Gray, wasted no time painting me as an unfit father. He spoke of my long work hours, my supposed emotional distance, and my recent decisions to remove Marissa from joint financial accounts. "Mr. Hood's actions demonstrate a lack of consideration for his wife's well-being," Gray said, his voice smooth but cutting. "He has not only isolated her financially but has also prioritized his career over his family." I clenched my fists under the table, but Jared remained unfazed. When it was his turn, he stood with confidence. "Your Honor," Jared began, "the facts paint a very different picture. Mr. Hood acted to protect his children's financial future after discovering significant irregularities in their joint accounts. These irregularities were directly tied to Mrs. Hood's unauthorized transfers of funds. Jared handed a folder of documents to the bailiff, who presented them to the judge. These records clearly show Mrs. Hood siphoning money into shell accounts tied to Mr. Bruce Cummins, with whom she has been conducting an extramarital affair. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Marissa's face turned crimson, and Gray stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. This line of argument is irrelevant to the custody dispute. Judge Peters raised an eyebrow. I'll allow it. Financial stability is a key factor in custody cases. Please continue, Mr. Kane. The courtroom descended into a battle of wills. Jared meticulously presented the evidence we had gathered: bank statements, surveillance photos, and transcripts of Marissa's messages with Bruce. Each piece was another nail in the coffin of her credibility. But Marissa wasn't going down without a fight. Gray called her to the stand, where she played the role of the wronged mother with practiced precision. I made mistakes, she admitted, her voice trembling, but everything I did was for my children. I was scared of losing them, scared of not being enough. Tears welled in her eyes, and a murmur of sympathy spread through the room. Even I felt a pang of guilt, though I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her tears. It was about the truth. Jared's cross-examination was brutal but fair. He pressed her on the financial discrepancies, the affair, and her decisions to involve Bruce in family matters. Mrs. Hood, he said, his tone calm but firm, do you believe someone who engages in such deceitful behavior is fit to make decisions for their children's future? Marissa hesitated, her confidence wavering. I only wanted what was best for them. And yet, Jared countered, you chose to prioritize your relationship with Mr. Cummins over your marriage and your children's stability. Is that correct? She had no answer. The next day, it was my turn to take the stand. Gray tried to rattle me, bringing up my long work hours and suggesting I had been emotionally unavailable to my family. Mr. Hood, Gray said, his voice dripping with condescension, how do you expect to raise 3 children on your own while maintaining your demanding career? I've already made changes to my work schedule, I replied evenly. My children are my priority, and I've taken steps to ensure they have the stability and support they need. And what about your temper? Gray pressed. Isn't it true you've had heated arguments with Mrs. Hood in front of the children? I looked directly at the judge. My frustration stemmed from discovering the betrayal and lies that had been hidden from me. I regret if my emotions ever affected my children, but my focus has always been on protecting them. Each side presenting their case with relentless determination. By the final day, the courtroom felt like a battlefield, both sides weary but unwilling to yield. When Judge Peters finally called for closing arguments, Jared stood with quiet confidence. Your Honor, he said, it is about the well-being of 3 innocent children. Mr. Hood has demonstrated his commitment to their future, while Mrs. Hood's actions have shown a pattern of instability and poor judgment. We ask that you consider the evidence carefully and prioritize the best interests of the children. The courtroom was tense as Judge Peters reviewed the final details of the case. The clacking of his pen against the desk was the only sound in the room. Both sides had presented their arguments, but one question remained unresolved. What did the children want? Before I make my ruling, Judge Peters said, his deep voice commanding attention, I believe it's important to hear from the children directly. Their wishes are not the only factor, but they are a crucial consideration in determining custody. My heart sank and raced at the same time. I glanced at Marissa, whose face was pale but expectant. Jared leaned toward me and whispered, stay calm, this could work in your favor. Thomas, Lucas, and Emma were waiting in a separate room with a child advocate, unaware that they were about to be called into the courtroom. My pulse quickened as the bailiff stepped out to fetch them. Thomas, being the eldest at 13, was called first. He entered the room hesitantly, his eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces before settling on me. I gave him a small nod, hoping to reassure him. He sat in the witness box, his posture stiff but composed. Thomas, Judge Peters began, his tone kind but firm. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your family. There are no right or wrong answers, and you're not in trouble. I just want to understand how you feel. Thomas nodded, gripping the armrests of his chair. Okay, he said quietly. Can you tell me a little about your relationship with your parents? The judge asked. Thomas hesitated, glancing at me and then at Marissa. I love them both, he said finally, but things have been really hard lately. In what way? The judge prompted gently. And I don't always feel like I know what's going on. But I know Dad is always there for us. He tries to make things better." The words were simple but powerful. I felt my throat tighten as Thomas continued. "Mom," he paused, searching for the right words. "She's been distant, and sometimes, it feels like she cares more about other things than us." Marissa flinched, her hands clenching in her lap. Gray leaned toward her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. "Thomas," the judge said, his tone softening, "if you had to choose where you wanted to live, who would you feel safest and happiest with?" Thomas looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "With Dad." When Thomas left the stand, Lucas was called next. At 8 years old, his innocence made the situation even more heartbreaking. He walked into the courtroom clutching his stuffed dinosaur, his eyes wide with curiosity and fear. I smiled at him, trying to convey a sense of calm. "Lucas," the judge said, his voice kind, "do you know why you're here today?" Lucas nodded slowly. "You want to know who I want to live with," he said matter-of-factly. "That's right," Judge Peters replied. "But first, can you tell me about your parents? What do you like most about them?" Lucas's face lit up as he spoke about the bedtime stories I read to him and the games we played together. "Dad makes me feel safe," he said, hugging his dinosaur tightly. "And what about your mom?" the judge asked. Lucas hesitated, his small brows furrowing. "Mom's nice," he said cautiously, "but she's been really sad lately, and sometimes, she gets mad at Dad a lot." Judge Peters nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Lucas, if you could live with one parent, who would you choose?" Lucas glanced at me, then at Marissa. His voice was soft but clear. "I want to stay with Dad." Marissa let out a quiet gasp, her face crumbling. Gray leaned toward her again, speaking urgently, but she didn't seem to hear him. Finally, Emma was brought in. At just 6 years old, she was too young to answer the same questions as her brothers. Instead, the child advocate who had spent time with her relayed Emma's sentiments to the court. "Emma has expressed a strong attachment to her father," the advocate said. "She feels secure in his presence and appreciates the stability he provides. While she loves her mother, she has noted feelings of confusion and sadness regarding her mother's behavior in recent months." Marissa's tears flowed freely now, her head bowed as the weight of her children's words settled over her. After the children were escorted back to the waiting room, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Judge Peters leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled as he considered the testimony. "Mr. and Mrs. Hood," he said finally, "it is clear that your children love both of you. However, their testimony, combined with the evidence presented, indicates that Mr. Hood is better positioned to provide them with the stability and support they need during this difficult time." Marissa let out a quiet sob, but the judge continued, "I am awarding full custody of the children to Mr. Hood, with Mrs. Hood granted supervised visitation rights. This arrangement may be revisited in the future, pending Mrs. Hood's demonstration of stability and commitment to her role as a parent." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the judge rose and exited the room. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief and sorrow mingling in my chest. Jared patted my shoulder, his expression a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. "You did it, Alex," he said, "but I know this isn't easy." Marissa sat frozen in her chair, her face streaked with tears. I felt a pang of guilt but reminded myself of what mattered most, my children's well-being. Later that evening, I gathered the kids in the living room to explain what had happened. Thomas sat beside me, his expression serious, while Lucas clutched his dinosaur tightly. Emma climbed onto my lap, her small arms wrapped around my neck. "We're going to be okay," I told them, my voice steady. "Things will be different, but we'll get through it together, I promise." Lucas looked up at me. "Are we staying here with you, Dad?" "Yes, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "You're staying with me." Thomas nodded, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Good," he said quietly, "this feels right." That night, as I tucked each of them into bed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The legal battle had been grueling, but it was worth it. My children were safe, and we could finally begin to rebuild our lives. The judge's decision came a week later. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable as he read his ruling. Marissa let out a quiet gasp, her face crumbling. Gray leaned toward her again, speaking urgently, but she didn't seem to hear him. Finally, Emma was brought in. At just 6 years old, She was too young to answer the same questions as her brothers. Instead, the child advocate who had spent time with her relayed Emma's sentiments to the court. Emma has expressed a strong attachment to her father, the advocate said. She feels secure in his presence and appreciates the stability he provides. While she loves her mother, she has noted feelings of confusion and sadness regarding her mother's behavior in recent months. Marissa's tears flowed freely now, her head bowed as the weight of her children's words settled over her. After the children were escorted back to the waiting room, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Judge Peters leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled as he considered the testimony. "Mr. and Mrs. Hood," he said finally, "it is clear that your children love both of you. However, their testimony, combined with the evidence presented, indicates that Mr. Hood is better positioned to provide them with the stability and support they need during this difficult time." Marissa let out a quiet sob, but the judge continued, "After careful consideration, I am awarding full custody of the children to Mr. Hood, with Mrs. Hood granted supervised visitation rights." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the judge rose and exited the room. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relief and sorrow mingling in my chest. Jared patted my shoulder, his expression a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. "You did it, Alex," he said, "but I know this isn't easy." Marissa sat frozen in her chair, her face streaked with tears. I felt a pang of guilt but reminded myself of what mattered most, my children's well-being. The house was quieter than it had been in months, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of conflict, it was the calm after a storm. With the legal battle behind me, I could finally shift my focus to what mattered most, my children and their future. That morning, I sat at the dining table with a notepad and a stack of documents Jared had sent over. The custody ruling was just the beginning. Now I had to ensure financial stability for the kids and take steps to provide them with a sense of normalcy. The first step was setting up a trust fund. Jared had suggested it weeks ago, but the chaos of the court proceedings had delayed it. Now, it felt like a tangible way to protect their future. As I filled out the paperwork, Lucas wandered into the kitchen, still clutching his ever-present stuffed dinosaur. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked, his voice curious. "Just some work to make sure you and your brother and sister are taken care of," I said with a smile. "Are we gonna be okay?" he asked, his small voice tinged with uncertainty. I knelt down, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to be more than okay, buddy. We're a team, and teams stick together." He nodded, seeming reassured, and ran off to join Emma in the living room. Watching them play, I felt a pang of determination. They deserved the world, and I would do everything in my power to give it to them. In the days that followed, I worked to create a routine for the kids. Breakfasts were shared at the dining table, school drop-offs and pickups became sacred moments, and evenings were filled with homework, board games, and bedtime stories. Thomas, though older, took on a protective role, helping Lucas and Emma adjust to the changes. One night, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her big, questioning eyes. "Dad, is Mom going to come back?" The question caught me off guard. "Mom will always be part of your life," I said carefully, "but for now, she won't be living with us." "Did she do something bad?" Emma asked, her voice hesitant. I sighed, stroking her hair gently. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." Emma seemed to accept this, her small hand clutching mine as she drifted off to sleep. I stayed by her side a little longer, the weight of her question lingering in my mind. Marissa's supervised visits began the following week. They were held at a family center, a neutral space designed to make the children feel comfortable. I watched from a distance as she hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thomas was reserved, his responses short and polite. Lucas clung to his dinosaur, his smile hesitant but genuine. Emma was the warmest of the three, her natural sweetness softening the tension. Marissa caught my eye briefly as the session ended, her expression a mix of gratitude and sadness. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but the pain she had caused was still too fresh. Bruce, predictably, tried to reinsert himself into the picture. He reached out to Marissa during one of her visits, prompting Jared to act swiftly. A restraining order was filed, ensuring that he could no longer contact her or the children. "He's grasping at straws," Jared said during a phone call. "Without you to leech off, he's losing his footing." "Good," I replied. "Let him deal with the consequences of his actions." Still, The thought of Bruce lingering on the periphery made my skin crawl. I doubled down on security measures, installing cameras around the house and ensuring the kids were always accompanied during outings. One afternoon, while sorting through old files in my office, I came across a photo album I hadn't opened in years. It was filled with pictures of happier times, family vacations, birthday parties, lazy Sunday mornings. As I flipped through the pages, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost but also of what I was fighting to rebuild. I closed the album gently, placing it back on the shelf. The past was the past, and I couldn't let it define the future. The kids and I began creating new traditions to fill the void left by the old ones. Friday nights became movie nights, complete with popcorn and pillow forts. Weekends were for adventures, trips to the park, visits to the zoo, or just baking cookies in the kitchen. Thomas began opening up more, his quiet strength shining through in unexpected ways. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me and said, "I'm glad we're staying with you, Dad. It feels safe." His words were simple but carried a depth that brought tears to my eyes. "I'm glad too, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "We're going to be okay." By the end of the month, the house felt lighter. The kids were adjusting, their laughter filling the rooms once more. My work had shifted to accommodate their needs, and while the balance wasn't always perfect, it was worth every moment. One evening, as I sat in the living room reviewing documents, Lucas climbed onto my lap. "Are you happy, Dad?" he asked, his voice soft. The question caught me off guard, but I smiled, hugging him tightly. "I'm getting there, buddy," I said honestly, "and having you and your siblings makes me happier every day." 2 years later, we left there to go to another place that gave us a better life. Episode 5, A New Dawn. The air in Millbrook felt sharper than I remembered, the cool morning breeze carrying a faint hint of autumn leaves. It had been 10 years since I left this town, its streets lined with memories both bitter and sweet. Now, as I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and triumph. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't returning to pick up the pieces. I was coming back to show how far I had risen from the ashes. The town had changed in subtle ways. Familiar landmarks remained, but new buildings had sprung up, their modern facades blending awkwardly with the historic charm of Millbrook. This trip was more than business, it was a testament to resilience, proof that no betrayal could define me forever. The opening ceremony was scheduled for later that afternoon, but I arrived early to walk through the new building. The sleek glass and steel design stood in stark contrast to the modest beginnings of my career. Inside, the air was filled with the hum of anticipation as employees prepared for the event. Mr. Hood, Claire, my assistant, greeted me as I entered the lobby. She handed me a folder with final details about the day's agenda. "The press is already gathering outside. It's going to be a big turnout." "Good," I said, flipping through the documents. "Let's make sure everything runs smoothly. This isn't just about the company, it's about showing how far we've come." As I walked through the floors, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. 10 years ago, I was standing in the ruins of my marriage and my trust, wondering if I'd ever rebuild. But through hard work and an unshakable focus on my children, I had not only survived, I had thrived. By the time the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, the area outside the headquarters was filled with employees, local officials, and members of the press. Standing at the podium, I took a moment to survey the crowd. My eyes immediately found Thomas, Emma, and Lucas, who stood near the front. Their presence gave me strength, as it always had. "This day," I began, my voice steady, "is not just about opening a new chapter for this company. It's about celebrating resilience, hard work, and the ability to rise above challenges. 10 years ago, I could not have imagined standing here today, but with determination and the support of those who matter most, anything is possible." The crowd erupted into applause as I cut the ribbon, marking the official opening of the building. Thomas approached me afterward, his handshake firm and his smile filled with pride. "You've built something incredible, Dad," he said. "This place is amazing." "Thank you, son," I replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But you and your siblings are the real reason I'm here. Everything I've done has been for you." That evening, we gathered at a local restaurant, a favorite from my childhood that, surprisingly, was still standing. The warm lighting and familiar decor brought back memories of simpler times. But tonight was about creating new ones. My children, now young adults, sat around the table, their laughter and stories filling the air. Emma, now a passionate environmental science major, spoke excitedly about her research projects. "We're working on a sustainable energy model that could revolutionize small towns like Millbrook," she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "That's impressive," I said, genuinely proud. "You're going to make a real difference." Lucas, now 20, had just started his first internship in the tech industry. He shared tales of late nights debugging code and learning from seasoned developers. "It's tough," he admitted, "but I think I've found what I want to do." "I have no doubt you'll excel," I said, smiling. "You've always had a knack for figuring things out." Thomas, ever the steady presence, listened attentively, occasionally chiming in with advice or encouragement. Now 25, he had taken on a leadership role in his own career, balancing his natural charisma with a quiet strength. Watching him interact with his siblings, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. After dinner, we took a walk through the old neighborhood. The house we once called home loomed in the distance, its silhouette unchanged. We stopped at the edge of the driveway, memories washing over us. The next day, as I walked through the center of town, I encountered Marissa. She was standing outside a coffee shop, her expression a mixture of surprise and hesitation. Time had softened her, but her presence still stirred memories I had long buried. "Alex," she said, her voice cautious, "I didn't expect to see you here. Do the kids come back with you?" "I'm in town for the new headquarters, and the kids came along too," I replied evenly. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. "They've grown into incredible people. You've done a wonderful job with them." "They've done the hard work," I said. "I just gave them a foundation." There was a pause before she spoke again. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I needed to tell you that I regret it." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't carry the weight they once might have. "Thank you," I said simply. "I've moved on, and I hope you found peace too." She nodded, her eyes misty, and walked away. As I watched her go, I felt a sense of closure. The wounds she had caused had healed, leaving only scars to remind me of how far I had come. That night, as I stood on the balcony of my hotel, the lights of Millbrook twinkled below. This town had once been a symbol of betrayal and heartbreak, but now it stood as a testament to resilience and growth. My children were thriving, my career was flourishing, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The day after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I walking through the town square. Millbrook had always been small, but its charm was undeniable. People greeted me with warm smiles, a few stopping to congratulate me on the company's new headquarters. The warmth felt genuine, a stark contrast to the skepticism I had encountered when I left a decade ago. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Thomas, asking if I had time to meet him and his siblings at the park. Smiling, I sent a quick reply, "On my way." When I arrived, the sight before me brought an unexpected pang of emotion. Thomas was tossing a frisbee with Lucas, their laughter echoing across the open field. Emma sat under a tree, her sketchpad balanced on her knees, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was a moment of simple joy, but it spoke volumes about how far we'd come as a family. "Dad," Lucas shouted, waving me over, "think you can still catch like you used to?" I chuckled, rolling up my sleeves. "Let's watch." For the next hour, I played alongside them, running and laughing like I hadn't in years. Thomas's throws were precise, Lucas's wild but enthusiastic, and Emma eventually joined in, her giggles a melody I hadn't realized I missed. For that brief time, everything felt perfect, like the scars of the past had finally faded. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, we sat together on a bench overlooking the park. Lucas leaned against me, his head on my shoulder, while Thomas and Emma shared a quiet conversation nearby. "Dad," Lucas said softly, breaking the silence, "do you think things would have been different if we hadn't left Millbrook?" I thought carefully before answering. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but leaving gave us the chance to rebuild, to find a better path, and look at where we are now. I wouldn't trade this for anything." Lucas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Me neither." Thomas turned toward us, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about how much we've changed since then. I used to hate everything that happened, but now I think, maybe it needed to happen. It made us stronger." Emma chimed in, her voice soft but sure. "Now, we're better for it." Their words filled me with pride. They had faced challenges no child should have to endure, yet they had emerged resilient and full of hope. It was a testament to their strength and perhaps to mine as well. The next day, I visited the site of our old house one last time. The large oak tree in the backyard was still there, its branches reaching skyward as if untouched by the passage of time. As I stood there, memories of the past played like a film reel in my mind: birthday parties, late-night talks, the laughter of 3 young children who hadn't yet known hardship. The front door creaked open, and an older man stepped out. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cautious but not unkind. "I used to live here," I explained, "just passing through town and thought I'd stop by." The man studied me for a moment before nodding. "You're welcome to look around. It's a good house, strong foundation." Strong foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I walked the perimeter of the house, I realized it wasn't the walls or the roof that had made it a home. It was the love and memories we'd built inside, and those I carried with me, no matter where I went. That evening, we gathered at the headquarters for a private family dinner. It wasn't fancy, just takeout from a local diner, but the simplicity felt fitting. We shared stories, laughed over old photos Emma had dug up, and talked about the future. Lucas spoke excitedly about his internship, while Emma shared her plans to study abroad. Thomas, ever the steady one, revealed that he was considering starting his own business. "You've got the drive for it," I told him, "and the wisdom. Just remember, you don't have to do it alone." "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "That means a lot." As the night wore on, Thomas pulled me aside. "Dad, there's something I wanted to say," he began, his tone serious. "I know things weren't always easy for you, for any of us, but you never gave up on us. You showed us what it means to fight for what's right." His words hit me harder than I expected. "Thomas, you and your siblings are the reason I kept going. I wanted to give you a life where you could thrive, no matter what we went through." "Well, I understand," he said, his smile small but genuine. On my final day in Millbrook, I found myself at the town's edge, staring at the horizon. The last decade had been a journey I wouldn't have wished on anyone, but standing there, I realized I wouldn't trade it either. The pain, the betrayal, the struggles, they had shaped me into the man I am today. As I climbed into the car to leave, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. Millbrook was no longer a place of heartbreak, it was a chapter in my story. One that had taught me resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of building something new from the ruins. The final morning of my visit to Millbrook began with the sound of chirping birds and the soft hum of activity outside my hotel window. The small town was waking up, its streets beginning to fill with life. Today wasn't just about wrapping up a trip, it was about closing a chapter of my life and opening a new one. As I sipped my coffee, my mind wandered to the decade that had passed. Betrayals, legal battles, rebuilding, it all felt like a lifetime ago. And yet, it was those experiences that had shaped the life I now cherished. I no longer carried the weight of resentment. Forgiveness, though hard-earned, had become my greatest victory. Later that morning, the weather was perfect, cool but sunny, the kind of day that invited reflection and connection. Thomas, Emma, and Lucas had already got up early, sitting on a bench in the hotel garden. "You're late, Dad," Emma teased, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'm savoring my last hours here," I replied, smiling. "I'll miss it when I'm gone." Lucas grinned. "We'll think about it." We laughed, and for a moment, I simply sat there, soaking in the joy of being with them. Moments where the past didn't matter, where the only thing that existed was love. As the sun climbed higher, the conversation turned toward the future. Emma spoke excitedly about her upcoming study abroad program in Europe. "I'll miss you guys," she admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I can't wait to explore and learn. It's going to be amazing." "It will be," I said, my chest swelling with pride, "and we'll always be here, cheering you on." Lucas chimed in next, sharing his plans to continue his internship and eventually work full-time in the tech industry. "I want to build something that lasts," he said earnestly, "something that helps people, like you've done." "Dad, you'll do great," I assured him. "And remember, it's not just about what you build, it's about the people you impact along the way." Thomas, as usual, was more reserved, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. "I've been thinking a lot about starting my own business," he said. "Something small, at first, but meaningful." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. "Whatever path you choose, you'll have my support. You've got what it takes, Thomas, don't ever doubt that." After that conversation, we decided to visit the local community center. The building had been renovated in recent years, now housing programs for underprivileged families and at-risk youth. It was a place where my children and I had volunteered briefly before leaving Millbrook, and it held a special place in my heart. Inside, we were greeted warmly by the staff, who remembered us from years ago. As we toured the space, I felt a sense of pride seeing how much it had grown. "This is what it's all about," I said to my children. "Giving back, creating opportunities for others. It's how we move forward." Emma nodded, her eyes scanning the vibrant murals on the walls. "Maybe I'll start something like this one day," she mused, "a center for environmental education or sustainability." "You absolutely should," I said, "and when you do, I'll be your first volunteer." The final hours of the day were spent at the new headquarters. The building felt different now, less like a professional achievement and more like a symbol of resilience. We stood together on the rooftop terrace, overlooking the town as the sun began to set. "This view never gets old," Lucas said, leaning against the railing. "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "It's a reminder of how far we've come." Thomas turned to me, his expression serious. "Dad, do you ever think about the people Mom, Bruce, even Grandma?" The question hung in the air, heavy but necessary. "I do," I admitted. "I think about them often. I hope they've found happiness." Emma frowned slightly. "Do you ever regret forgiving them?" I considered her question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back into your life," I said. "It's about freeing yourself from the pain they caused." It took me time to understand that, but when I finally did, it was like a weight had been lifted. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think they've changed?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Everyone is in the future. They too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in hues of orange and gold, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The journey that had begun with betrayal and heartbreak had brought me here, to this moment of peace and clarity. As we left there and parted ways for the night, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the struggles that had shaped us, for the love that had sustained us, and for the future that lay ahead. Millbrook, once a place of pain, had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal. The next morning, I climbed into the car, the engine purring softly as I prepared to leave. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the town receding into the distance, but instead of sadness, I felt peace. This was not a goodbye, it was a new beginning. What do you think Alex's journey teaches us about forgiveness and resilience? How would you approach reconnecting with a past that once caused so much pain? Share your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching the video, we hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more interesting videos, hope to see you soon.